If you can buy potatoes or grow potatoes, you can make your own potato starch. I would recommend using a potato that has a lot of starch in it, and these are our own homegrown. We are first peeling those potatoes. Put your potatoes in a bowl of water so they don't brown as you're doing this process. Once they're peeled, we cut them up into pieces that will feed into our food processor. You could grind them by hand, but I would recommend using a food processor if you're doing very many. It's slick and fast, and the cleanup is minimal. You want to shred your potatoes and fill your largest bowl with some cold water. And as you shred your potatoes, add them to your bowl of cold water and just let them sit. Make sure that your potatoes are all covered with water or you risk them going brown. These are a red Pontiac potato. As you can see, they're a nice white potato. And as we shred the potatoes, we just keep adding them to the water. And top your bowl up with fresh water if you find that you don't have enough to cover your potatoes. As you can see, that water is getting to be pretty starchy. So we're going to take our potatoes out. Just drain them in a colander. That way you catch any of that good potato starch that's coming out of there. Then we're dumping our first rinsed potatoes into a fresh bowl and continue the process until you have all your potatoes out of the bowl. So we have our second rinse bowl and our first rinse bowl. You can see it's pretty brown, but don't let that get you down. That's what it's going to look like to start with. That bowl is just full of starch. You can see how white it is. So the second rinse and the first rinse. And the potato starch is starting to settle at the bottom. We just used the ladle just to get the water off the top because the bowl was so full that we didn't want to risk spilling it all over the counter. And then we just carefully pour the top of the water off of that starch that settled into the bottom. And like I said, this color is normal. Don't be alarmed. It won't look like this by the time we're done. You can see how firm that starch is getting in the bottom of the bowl there. Now we've added some fresh water to that starch that was in the bowl. Just give it a good stir around. Basically, we are just rinsing the starch at this point. And there it is, settling out. That's its second rinse. Again, we repeat this process. Once the starch is settled to the bottom, just pour off that dirty water and let it go down the drain. There's nothing really to do with that. You don't want to disturb the starch on the bottom. You don't want to lose any of that good starch. As the starch sits longer, it gets more firm, which is awesome. That's what it's supposed to do. So now we have added some water to the starch and it reconstitutes right away. So it'll mix up into that mixture and we're putting it through a fine mesh screen because there's a few things in this starch mixture still. There's little pieces of potato peel and maybe some other things that ended up floating in the water. And so we are just making sure we get all that starch out of the bottom of the bowl and running it through that fine sieve. And then you see what is left. That's just discard there. This is a third rinse on this potato starch and it's looking pretty clear. At this point, we pour off the water that's in there and we put it in this metal plate. I would recommend putting it at an angle so that the water will drain off and you can just pour it off. Now let your starch just dry on the counter several days, giving it little stirs throughout the day. and it will turn into just the nicest starch. So we didn't want to waste these potatoes, of course, so we ended up blanching the potatoes in a pot of water for 2 minutes. And that just cooks them just a little bit so that when they go into the freezer and come out, they cook up so nicely in the frying pan. You just want to make sure that you get as much moisture out of the potatoes before they go into the bag for storage as possible. And so we use our salad spinner to get as much moisture out as possible. You want to rinse them under cold water after they're done blanching to stop the cooking process. And then drain as much water as possible, because when you make your hash browns, you don't want any extra water in the frying pan with them, just some oil. And there we go, potatoes ready to go in the freezer. You could also vacuum seal these for longer storage. Thanks for watching, everybody. Take care.